Very much. Mr. Leahy.
Oh, Mayor, members of council, continuing our process of bringing you seawater rise, stormwater presentations. We are today going to make a presentation on the stormwater fee. And what we've been working on is perhaps a different way that it could be apportioned over our residential customers. So Mark Johnson, who's the Director of Public Works, will be making part of the presentation, I believe.
Correct.
And he'll introduce the consultants and staff we have with us.
Okay, Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Wood, council members, thank you for letting Public Works and our team come talk to you about the ERU. Our title is Stormwater Cost of Service Study Results. This is the third presentation in a series of presentations. I'm going to pretty much just give an intro. I've brought our Arcadis team of Amy Jablowski, Vice President, Area Lead of Virginia Carolinas Arcadis, and Mark Van Auken, who's the Principal Water Engineer from Arcadis, who really worked on this project. And we also have Gretchen Peterson, who she did all the excellent GIS work to get us to the analysis that we got to. Also, Councilwoman Abbott, I know you raised a question about Norfolk's credit system. I've got Diana St. John here today. She's the acting MS4 administrator. She's going to be giving you the stormwater regulatory presentation next week, and she's going to touch on our credit system. So we are aware of what Norfolk does, and we do it a little bit differently, but we are going to look at that as part of next steps of this presentation. So now I'm asking Amy Jablowski to come up and just give an overall intro on what we've been doing, then she'll bring up Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Make sure I know how to use the clicker correctly. Thank you. So I wanted to provide just a little bit of context around the study that we're going to present the results of today. This started with the development of a long-term financial planning model for the stormwater utility to make sure that we were helping the city to better understand the long-term financial forecast of the stormwater fund, and also to evaluate a variety of different what-if scenarios around some of the capital improvements that you're looking at around sea level rise, climate change, and the other things that are facing the stormwater utility. So as a result of that long-term financial planning model, there were a series of projected rate increases for the council's consideration. And when we looked at the overall amount of revenue that was going to be required in future out years based on the different capital planning scenarios, at that point, we knew the amount of revenue that needed to be recovered, but we wanted to take a step back and work with the city to evaluate how that cost was going to be recovered. So was the current ERU equitable? Was the current rate structure and the way that the funds were being recovered from the ratepayers, residential, commercial, and others, was that equitable? Was the credit program being adequately used? Are there different ways that we can start to incentivize that to reach the city's overall goals with stormwater? So the purpose of this study was to take a look at that, make sure that the ERU and the way that the stormwater fee structure was being implemented was based on cost of service principles, so people were being charged appropriately for the amount of stormwater they were contributing to the system and the amount that their use of the system was being required. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark Van Auken now, who was the principal engineer. He's also our national leader in stormwater, to talk about the analysis that he went through in order to evaluate the ERU.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. So the city's stormwater utility was created 26 years ago, and it was based, as is very common at that time and even today, on the impervious area generated by the single-family residential. So your utility is set up, it has three primary areas that receives funding. It has a flat fee for all the residential properties within the city. The non-residential and the multifamily residential pay based on the actual impervious areas of their property, and those are the hard areas, the roofs, sidewalks, parking lots. And then the governmental and the undeveloped areas pay no fee within the city. And so that fee over the last 26 years has increased based on evolving maintenance, for compliance with your municipal separate storm sewer system, the MS4 permit that you have, and also capital improvement needs. The current revenue that's generated from the utility is about $45 million. And even though that fee has increased, the ERU has increased over the last 26 years, the basis for the ERU has not changed at all. So just for a little re-education about when we talk about ERU, what that means, it's equivalent residential unit. This just shows an example. The current ERU is 2,269 square feet. So for simple math, that the one on the left shows a single-family residential home with a 1,769 square foot home, 500 square feet for the sidewalk and driveway, which adds up to that 2,269. Back when this stormwater utility was developed, we didn't have GIS systems where we had great information on all of the single-family homes. So the practice back then was to look at a representative, about 10% of single-family homes across the city, and generate what is an average square footage of impervious area for those properties. And that's, I'm sure, was likely what was developed for the city here at the time. The way that it works with the non-residential stormwater utility is they pay a certain percentage based on the number of ERUs that are equivalent. So the one on the right shows a commercial or a non-residential site that's got a building that's over 8,000, it's got a parking lot of 4,000, and additional impervious areas of 10,000, which adds up to the 22,690, which is 10 times as much as what the single-family average square footage is. And so that means that that property would pay the equivalent of 10 ERUs, since they have 10 times more the impervious area than what a single family does. So just the basics of how your system is set up. Wanted to go through, based upon our study, I know you've had a very long day, didn't want to get into all the particulars about everything that we looked at for the study, but some of the conclusions that came out of the study that we performed, if you look at the pie chart that's on the right-hand side, roughly half of the revenue that's generated from the stormwater utility comes from the residential properties. Usually I would say most of the utilities I've been involved with, it's usually 50% comes from the commercial or from the non-residential areas. You just have a high amount of revenue that's generated from the residential, and you get about 30% from the commercial industrial areas. The rest comes from your multifamily units, agricultural, and other related ones. But just wanted to point out where the basic breakdown of the money is that you get from your utility. One thing that we thought was pretty interesting looking at it is basically 1 out of every 5 properties residential properties you have here in the city has issues with flooding associated with it. So there are a lot of areas that do have flooding. I say when we get to the district maps, we did take a look at whether it made sense to look at reproportioning the payment area or the utility fee based on those areas that receive more flooding. More than just based on the size of the property, but that was a little bit harder to manage. So I'll get to that in just a moment. Another interesting fact that 75% of all the single-family residential properties right now are greater than what that average impervious area is supposed to be. I mean, realistically, if your ERU is accurate, 50% of the property should be larger and 50% should be smaller. Right now, you have 75% of them that are larger than that, which means that you have inequity in what's being charged. And in fact, roughly 1 out of every 7 homes, residential homes, has more than twice as much impervious area as what the average is. So there is some clear equity issues in terms of the sizes of the impervious area for the properties around the city. We were asked just to make a quick comparison to what the other cities around the state are doing. And there are a number of communities that do have tiered rates right now. And if you look at this chart information, most of them have multiple categories for the residential side. Usually the condos or townhouses are broken off. Those are the smaller type ones pay less, where the single family ones based on their size will pay a little more. So the idea of switching to a tiered rate structure for the city certainly has merit because there's others within the area. It's interesting that Blacksburg, Richmond, and Staunton all have tiered rates, and Ingrid, I'm sure, will tell me, Stoughton was the highest one that had how many? 28 different rate structures. We don't want to overcomplicate things here. They had it divided up, I think, by every 200 square feet from a previous area. With GIS now, we have the capabilities of doing that, but for having a system that your staff and everything can manage reasonably, we tried to stick with what we thought were a reasonable number. As you can see, a lot of the areas a lot of the communities that do have tiered rate structures just have a few simple rates that they're broken down into. So I think that the city, if they move to a tiered structure, would certainly be on the right track. In terms of what the actual comparison between monthly fees are, Alexandria and Prince George County have, I would say, comparable fees. Chesterfield County just came online, so they introduced theirs at a much lower rate. So you're really not, and comparatively, you're not too far outside of where other communities are and what they're paying right now for their single-family residential. We looked at two options for updating the ERU. Again, looking at tiered system. We did look at a 3-tiered and a 4-tiered system, and decided that the 3-tiered one made a little bit more sense. With both of these options, breaking them into 3 tiers, that middle tier, what we're calling tier 2, that's houses in between. Oh, I should state that when we went and we did an evaluation of all of the single-family and townhouses, condo properties within the city, and the ERU went from the 2,269 up to almost 3,000. So it did increase significantly based upon what was done 26 years ago. So when we looked at that about being in the middle, we looked at a couple thousand feet on either side of that for our tier 2. So we looked at those properties between 2,000 and 4,000 square feet as being a range where we would not have any change whatsoever in the fee structure that would be paid. We were looking for those that are much smaller properties, those that are less than 2,000, of seeing a reduction in what they would pay, and for those homes that were 4,000, which is almost twice as high as what the original ERU was, but substantially larger than what your average single-family residential is, they would pay more. In this first instance, to make things more equitable, we just did a simple taking the 2,000 square footage, which was the top end of the tier 1, divided it by the current ERU of the 2977 comes out to be about 2/3. So we're looked at a decrease of about 33% for that. And to offset that, based on the fact there were less homes in the tier 3 than in the tier 1, there's an increase of over 50% for what those larger homes would pay. So this one we feel is equitable. However, looking at one that's a little bit less severe of a change, this option 2, excuse me, we were looking at trying to see if there was a way of keeping that increase on the tier 3 properties from being larger than what we would see from a non-residential standpoint. So we looked at just about a little over a 25% increase for those tier 3 homes, which resulted in about a 10% decrease for the tier 1 communities. I should point out that because we have increased the ERU to make it consistent with what's currently there, the rate that's charged by the non-residential customers has to increase to offset that. So they actually will see no difference in pay because the ERU is larger and they're being charged per ERU. The cost needs to be higher to make them come out so they're paying the same. And this next slide will help explain that. So for a couple examples of what the impact would be for the different changes in fees, for a property in Centerville right now that's a little bit smaller, that would pay the average payment for currently, or actually I'm sorry, this is in 2021 with the increase in rate structures that we have, would be looking at a little less than $200 in the way that the current rate increases are coming out. If we looked at that first option, which is the 33% reduction, they would see a decrease down of about $65. If we went with the option 2, which is just a 10% decrease, they would see a decrease of about $18 a year. So, and in either case, they are seeing a benefit with the change, which is more equitable based on the amount of square footage that they have for the property. For those that are, I say the middle tier, tier 2, there would see no changes whatsoever. For the larger homes, like in Lynn Haven, for this example, that's over 6,000 square feet of impervious area. Instead of that 2021 rate of $193, they would see in the first instance an increase of about $100 a year on property. Though the tier 2 increase is a little bit over roughly about $50. So a pretty significant increase from what they currently pay right now. And as I pointed out on the non-residential side for this commercial establishment in Kempsville, right now, or in 2021, they would pay a little less than $3,000, and that fee would not change whatsoever in either of the two options. So all those non-residential ones would be staying the same. Yes.
I'm just curious. So all these are what tier are they in again?
Okay, so this is tier 1.
Okay.
Tier 2 is not shown. This is tier 3, and that is your non-residential. Actually, it would have been helpful to list the tiers, but good question. Thank you for bringing that
Okay,
up.
John and Jess.
Well, wait a minute, I just wanna, are we gonna just wait till he finishes?
You wanna wait till you
I'm
finish?
willing to wait.
Yeah, we'll
If you want to
Let's-
wait, it's up to you.
We have a couple
Yep.
more slides.
Very good.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Let's get through it.
yeah. And I will be bringing Mark up for questions. No, actually, we're both named Mark, so we made it easy. So I can defer to him if you ask for Mark for questions. We thought that it'd be interesting to show you the breakdown on the different tiers between each of the different districts. As you can see that Lynn Haven seems to be the one that is the most impacted by the change to the larger, to having the most tier 3 properties. Whereas Rose Hill, Centerville, and some of the other ones that are a little bit westerly are seeing more benefit from the tier 1 communities. So, and we handed out the bigger map so you have a little bit easier glance to look at it. And I'm sure we'll be able to get back to a conversation about this a little bit later. But just wanted to at least make it a little bit easier just to see what the impacts are for your districts for this. We did, as I think I was alluding to earlier, we did look at rate structures by district if we wanted to change it to that, but it'd be much more manageable for the city just to be able to have this more simplified 3-tier structure the way it is right now, just based on impervious area. This one, with each one of those options that we presented, we were looking at a revenue neutral one where we're not changing the amount of money that's being not changing that roughly $45 million that was projected. This just shows there was a slight difference just based upon the e-forecast model that Amy was referencing earlier versus what the city had with the with their spreadsheet of all of the properties. But as you can see, that basically they are consistent with each other about what the parcel-based data projects versus e-forecast model. And actually, the parcel-based one is more conservative because we had a little less number, for whatever reason, of parcels that's generated. But we just wanted to show you that the model that we're using and what we had done for this analysis, basically we're on track for how much the revenue was going to be. We were asked to look at if there were any legal implications of making this change with the ERU. And I think with the move to a more equitable one, we are showing, or we are meeting the Code of Virginia stormwater regulations about demonstrating that it's that these are based upon analysis that's a relationship with the amount charged versus the service they're providing based on impervious area. And then you also have your own code of ordinances that this mentions about allocating things that are practical based on the impact of the stormwater system. So legally, we don't see there necessarily being a challenge for implementing a system like this. And so finally, at least for the next steps, we're looking at refining and finalizing the stormwater fee credits for the 2021 through 2025. Developing an outreach process for this fee program. And then moving forward with implementing the new system. And so we mentioned that the credits would be looked at, and with the fee structure, I guess that really falls under that first bullet item is something that would be addressed down the road. So I know you're very interested in asking questions about everything, so.
Okay, John, Jess, and Jim.
First
And
of
then
all,
Rosemary.
the
Yes.
service that we're getting is if you take a house, especially these 2 or 3 areas that sits on an acre and a half, maybe it might be 60, 90 feet off the street.
Okay.
Has 4,000 square feet of surface area, impervious surface, but has 45, 50,000 impervious surface. So a lot of the water is being treated on their property, and light rain probably never leaves their property. So they're not getting any service if no water is leaving their property except the driveway piece, because the yard is dispersed in the yard, and not all those places around that river are those types of homes. Then you go into other areas where you've got 1,700 square feet on maybe 5,000 square foot, and not count the driveway, it's more. So the percentage of impervious area is small, so on the same acreage, the amount of effluent is larger. So when you say you're delivering a service, the service should be treating water that's leaving the property. So the bigger your property, less pervious surface, independent of size, you are not having the same impact, even though your impervious surface is larger, because it's such a small percentage of the lot. So I'm trying to understand the nexus between, let me just finish up.
okay.
So you go back and look at that legal standard, put
Oh,
that
sure.
back up.
Sure.
It says that there's a rational relationship between the amount charged and the services provided. Well, if the service being provided isn't impervious surface, it's what's happening with the water that you're generating off your property that goes into a public street. Well, that requires a different analysis than just saying, independent of how big your yard is, or if it's a farm and it's 10 acres and you got a house in the middle, but you're getting charged. And so I don't see that there really is a relationship between the service someone is getting, being treated. Now, the other aspect of this is flood, right? So if people are saying, what am I getting at my home? You can't attribute how much flood protection they're getting. I mean, you can't attribute the fact that whatever you're doing for what they're paying, what the relationship is between their payment and a value of flooding reduction for their home. I haven't seen that in your analysis, maybe you have that. So I'm trying to see how, we don't charge a fee for police protection, no matter how big your home is or how small your home is. And we don't charge you more for fire protection, no how big or how small your home is, or if it's vinyl versus brick, or it's close, where you could say, well, there's some reasonable relationship between a fee. I think it's hard to say for flood control, which is flood protection of public safety, and say somehow I can do this impervious surface, but there's no relationship between what they pay and the benefit they receive, which should mean the amount charged and services provided. So how did you make the nexus between the services provided and provide a statistical cause and effect relationship with the amount that they pay? I haven't seen that in the brief.
Okay, I'll say this, traditionally, stormwater is approached for the common good, all right? The system, the stormwater system drains areas, overall area. It drains our public systems, it drains our transportation systems. All these systems need maintenance, okay? How to spread that cost as equitably as we can throughout the city. Stormwater utilities have taken the impervious area approach, as opposed to what you're saying, what is the direct service that I get? Because you cannot, it's hard to show what the direct flood control benefit, as you said, is to an individual house in a subdivision, but you can show the overall flood control benefit to the subdivision or overall drainage area.
I agree
And
with
that
you.
drainage area may have the lots that have 4,000 square feet or above impervious area and the smaller ones.
I don't disagree. It's the same argument I would use to
Yes.
explain why there's not a fee for police or fire, because you cannot attribute the specific value to receive to any single property owner. So we use broad-based taxes to collect. This fee is very regressive. There's a lot of older people live in these neighborhoods, and I just think and I said this back in 1993, because I was on council back then when they came up with this convoluted thing to issue revenue bonds versus general obligation debt, and that was the primary motivator for it. But what we're getting back, now that we're looking at it, this is just taking the money and trying to spread it some way and give some rationality to it, when the bottom line is, it's no more rational this way than it was the other way, and people are paying a fee for a common service like police and fire, and we come up with a classification scheme that says there's some relevance between what they pay and what they get, and I thank you for acknowledging that there is no relationship between what they pay and what they get.
Jess?
I have a couple questions. On slide 7, you were mentioning where you've made changes. I'd like to just, why no change to the non-residential?
Why no change to non-residential? Basically, we call it commercial. Well, you have to stay, when we make these changes, you have to stay revenue neutral. In other words, we have to, at the end of the day, bring in $45 million.
Right.
Okay, so the ERU number goes up to 2,977.
Yeah.
All right, they have the same amount of square footage on their commercial property, so you have to adjust the rate, which is what we've done, to get that overall classification category of non-residential back equal to the amount that the fund is bringing in from that group right now. If we do not do that, that means another group is going to have to cover that cost, which means we'd have to go look at the residential area to see what we'd have to do to increase their rate to compensate for the loss of rate in the commercial. Now, what the commercial gets right now under our stormwater fee adjustment program, they can get up to a 50% reduction in their fee by implementing stormwater BMPs on their property. If they don't have a BMP at all, they're getting charged 100% of their fee. If they go in and say, you know what, I want to reduce my fee by installing a wet pond, and that wet pond is going to take care of the water quality requirements and the flood control requirements, they will get a 50% fee reduction. So that's the incentive for the commercials to bring down their fee.
Are there only, in terms of the credit that they can get, is it only for a pond or
No.
an underground BMP, or are there other things they can do?
They can do other things, and we've got fee reductions. They can do, the best you can get is a wet pond and flood control. The next best is probably dry detention, which you'll get a 20%, and then we have a category of 10%, and those are your oil water separators or your water quality inlets. And things like that. So that's how they can get a reduction. And some businesses do go in and retrofit. They haven't in the past because our fee has been so low. The payback time has been so great. They go, I'll just pay the fee. But any new developments that come online, they are required to construct and install BMPs, which we turn around and we give them a credit as soon as they finish construction and they're all approved and they move in. So right at the start, they're getting a fee reduction.
I would, at a later date, I'd love to see what all is available to them. And it's
Sure.
not just for my education. And then more just out of because I mean, I know that Tom, you and I met and we discussed this prior. What did we look at like a fourth tier option for homes above like 6,000 square feet, or?
We did originally. We looked at 4 tiers, and one of them was a substantially was the larger. Yeah, I think. Let's see, 4,000. I think we looked at greater than 6,000. I think is what the breakout was.
there weren't enough houses, or?
Yeah, it didn't make a, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say
You
it
did the
did,
numbers.
yeah,
I'll
it didn't
talk
make,
about
it didn't make a substantial difference, and so we thought to simplify it, just going with the three-tier structure. We were trying to get a balance, we were hoping to get a balance where it'd be equal between what we have from a tier 1 and the tier 3, with, let's say, the majority being within the tier 2, where we'd be able to keep them the same, and without, to try to simplify the process a little bit.
I would like to add that in any system like this, there will be people who feel they need to be in the next lower tier, the people that are in that break. And so there is going to be some administrative cost on our end as people either submit their survey, or we may have to go out and survey and verify. And as people change, as they add, people are right on the edge, they might add some impervious surface or take it away. And in those kinds of things, there'll be changes. So if you get too many tiers, the ability to administer them and deal with the disputes as to which tier I belong in grows substantially.
So, I guess, it's so often when we get these briefings, it seems like we're given kind of like one or two options. I'm interested in knowing, was there, did you guys do kind of an analysis with a totally different thought, maybe something similar to what Councilman Moss was saying, like a ratio to the impervious surface to the lot size, or?
I say our analysis, we looked at, like I say, percent impervious, we looked at district area ones. We try to look at a couple of different areas that we thought would provide some insight of what might make sense. There's a range of different utilities or changes to utilities you can make. We mentioned earlier about if you went to 26 tiers, and the reason that you'd have the people trying to make adjustments to get to the next lower tier would be an administrative burden. There's also utilities out there that look at the potential load that's generated, especially within the Chesapeake Bay, for looking at load reductions associated with them. You can look at both pervious and impervious areas for lots, so that's another one that's I would say it's more work involved and challenges and changes, and so we looked at options that we thought were going to be a little bit simpler and easier to implement at this point, but were more equitable, with the key being the equitable one. If you wanted to spend the money, I mean, the city could go and have a range of different criteria it could look at to make it as equitable as possible. It's just whether you have the appetite for something of getting into that level of detail.
Yeah, I'll just say right now, we focus with the base idea that we're going to have an ERU, and we felt, and we pretty much concluded, that the average ERU in the city of Virginia Beach has increased since 1993. So we looked at that, confirmed that, and then we looked at, okay, what's the distribution of residential impervious area throughout the city, and would it make sense if we developed a tier system for the residential ERU? So that were the premises that we approached this with.
So then my other question, and this is really, I guess, for you, Tom, can we get I don't even know what to call it, but something that would show us if we decided to eliminate this altogether and go and just add it to the real estate tax, what that would look like to add it just
We
as
did that analysis some time back, and we can update it and resurrect it. It was about 7 or 8 cents on the real estate tax, if I recall, in that neighborhood. But we can update that.
I would just like to know, I mean, I don't like to think that our only option is doing what's presented to us, that maybe we could look at what that would look like, and maybe that's not the right decision, and I'm not trying to assert that it is, but I'm curious. And then I'll yield to somebody else in just a minute, but you mentioned that are we gonna talk about the credit program for residential
I think that's
now,
next
or-
week.
Well,
Okay,
rather talk about it more detail next week.
That's fine.
But when we started the credit program, we were focusing on the commercial because everybody got one ERU.
Sure.
And the rule was you don't go below one ERU. Okay? But the trend out there in some areas is, hey, let's see if we can enhance residential to improve water quality. So they're looking at some incentive programs. What we were going to do with this and next steps is we were going to look at the residential component and see what we could incorporate into Virginia Beach's credit system. It might not be, like Norfolk's. It might be something a little bit differently, but the whole idea is to get people involved from a water quality perspective, and in theory, reduce pollutant loads. So,
That's fine, we can wait, talk about that till next time. That's all I have.
So, I mean, obviously, when I take a look at this, the Lynn Haven District is,
right.
Yes.
in your revenue neutral scenario, it may be revenue neutral, but all the revenue's coming from my district now, which isn't so neutral for people who live in Lynn Haven. We talk about the credit piece, and that's concerning to me because, virtually every commercial structure that's been built in the last 20 years has some sort of stormwater maintenance facility. Whether it's very rarely wet ponds, but dry ponds and things like that are there. So they all are getting a credit, so that's nothing new, or they should all be getting a credit, because they're required to put them in. And by comparison also, at least in the last 10 years, the majority of your residential are putting in some sort of stormwater facility when you're building new construction homes. The last house I built had 4 BMPs, that were put in of varying sizes. Now, that particular structure would not have the ability under the present to get this 50% discount or whatever that a comparable commercial property would be. And I don't think that's equitable. I guess we're going to talk about that next week. But I think when you look at that's also an issue. The other thing that I take a look at now, obviously it's small print, so it's kind of hard to see different things. But I know where some new construction has occurred in what appears to be some of these green areas, and the requirements put on by the building department for all these things require a significant amount of water quality and water quantity treatment. And, and perhaps they do meet technically the square footage of impervious surface or what have you, but comparing a house that's been there for 40 years to a house that's been there for 2 years of the same size is just no comparison, because, standards have changed, everything has changed, and I think that's a flaw in it. But frankly, obviously, the flaw to me is the fact that all of this money now is coming out of my district.
Not all of it, I'm looking at the Bayside's carrying some of
Can I
the.
get a green marker, because I need to fill in a few.
Lewis is already out there measuring his new driveway.
There you go. Rosemary.
If you have a swimming pool, is that considered pervious or impervious?
We in our analysis, we did our first run, and our square footage, average square footage was higher. We asked the question, did we include pools and decks? The answer was yes. So we reran it, and we removed pools and decks. We assumed that when the rain hits a pool, the pool retains it 100%. There is no runoff in a pool. And a deck, water falls through the deck, so we got rid of decks.
We're talking
also.
wooden decks, not
Right.
Wooden decks,
not
yeah.
concrete.
Pool's backwash too.
And pools are, the building department considers pools impervious.
That's correct.
Well, I know, that's why I asked the
And
question,
so-
but I always felt like if the rain hits the pool, it retains it, unless it
Right.
overflows. Well, yeah, but
So
for the most part, it
there's
doesn't.
there's a little bit of truth on both of those.
Yes.
If the person pumps the pool down in advance of the storm, then the storm catches the water, it hasn't added. But if the individual waits until the storm comes and the pool's filling up, and they go out there and they turn on their pipe for blowing the water out right during or right after the storm, they've contributed to the impact. So it's a little bit, it goes either way. It depends on how the person manages the water in the pool.
This is
For everyday purposes, it just didn't seem right to count it as impervious surface. The other question that I had, there's ways to remove impervious surfaces, and I think it would be good to let like, they could have a gravel driveway instead of a concrete drive, or the driveways that have the little spaces that the water can go through.
Grass creek.
Yeah, and there's things that people can do to change their numbers. And it would probably be good to have information put out, make a great article in the newspaper, like they did on recycling, which was really a good article. But I think we need to also give people tools of what they can do to bring their costs down. And Jessica, I'm glad you brought up the credit, because I had mentioned it several times. It went to the Green Committee and never got anywhere, so. I think it's, because I always said, government can't do this by themselves. We need the help of our citizens to help us.
Okay, Michael, Jim, and John.
Well, I just have just a brief comment in that I just want to concur that I think that exploration of fee reductions that incentivize residents to make adaptations that mitigate the impact on the stormwater is something that is very good. And I think that you mentioned some of the challenges that exist in kind of measuring the impervious surfaces and making this determination. But I also think it's worth noting that technology is rapidly enhancing and evolving in this area, and it may become more simple in the very near future. So I think that's worth keeping in mind as we make these considerations as well. But I definitely would consider myself to be an advocate for credits that would reduce fees for adaptations such as a reduction in impervious surfaces, rain barrels, rain gardens, other sustainable adaptations. While they may not make a huge impact on an individual basis, on a collective basis, they would make a very significant impact, not only to the stormwater system, but also to water quality, as you noted. And so I think that's worth exploring, and I look forward to continuing that dialogue. I just have a question, because Councilmember Moss mentioned that the fee that's associated with the stormwater services it often or can have a significant impact on some of our communities most underserved. And just according to my analysis of the materials that you presented, the system as you propose would actually decrease, in many cases, or most instances, would decrease the fee paid by the most underserved in Virginia Beach. Is that correct?
Well, didn't quite look at it that way, but we know, we know that there are smaller properties out there that will get a fee reduction, and you can kind of look at the map and see where the trend is in the city, so.
I don't bring that up to suggest that I'm an advocate for it on that basis. I just think it's worth exploring.
Okay.
Okay, Jim?
So you're talking about
John.
water quality and water quantity here?
The fee covers both.
Right, okay. Because, and just to go back with what Michael said, if you take a look at this map, I mean, I can show you the places that flood, and a lot of the places that flood aren't in the green area, so again, this is the people in one area paying for, things that flood in another area, and that's concerning to me. So when you do this evaluation using GIS data, how do you know if I have a deck?
It actually is classified within the GIS system. There's a number of codes that have everything associated with sidewalks and driveways and decks and pools.
Right, but how do you know that?
We got files from our ITGIS group, and they took that data and they did their GIS data sorts and everything.
So I guess my point is that the data you're getting, I'm just using decks as an example because you talked about that being taken out. I mean, I can think of a number of decks that are built on top of rubber membranes because there's storage underneath them. So it doesn't get wet. So it looks like a deck, but it's not really. And
This is just based on, like I said, the era that.
Well, I understand. So my question is when you go through this thing and somebody says, look, I need to be in another tier because of this. So you're anticipating going out and actually surveying people's property at their invitation to say, look, I have a deck and it's a real deck or something like that. But I mean, I think you need to have that process. And what disturbs me also is this whole pool concept because, pools are considered by the people in, building permits and when you do your site plan as impervious. So that counts towards your impervious cover. So if it counts there, it needs to count here. I mean, unless we're gonna switch it up in both places. So I mean, I think you need to think about that.
For someone who's been in rate setting for 4 decades now, there does have to be a reasonable relationship between your fees and your customer classes. It does not have to be exact, and in fact, if you were to try to make it exact, you will not be able to, do it. Take water and sewer. It costs us a lot less to serve the person in water that is right near the Norfolk line, and it costs us the most to serve the person at the far end of our system. In case of our solid waste, it costs us, it's the distance from the transfer stations, how much more it costs us. So you have to average customer classes. You can break, as long as it's rational. For example, if we were to say the larger the impervious surface, the lower the rate, that would not pass a rationality test. But it does not have to be accurate. Also, I guess I'll do a couple other things. The stormwater regulations and these on-site BMPs, they moderate the 1 in 10-year storms, which we really know are coming more often in the future than they are. They're not really the 1 in 10-year storms anymore. They're more like the 6-month and 5-year storm. They don't do a whole lot for the 100-year storms, and that's the one which really will be coming more often in the future. And those are the ones that we are spending a lot of money on to try to mitigate the impact in our neighborhoods. So again, your rate setting is always going to have to be very roughly accurate or roughly approximately accurate. It's never going to be exactly accurate. Even a lawn, the ornamental lawn, a graded ornamental lawn is why we call it impervious surface. It generates a tremendous amount of runoff in a 100-year storm. Soon as the top inch or so gets saturated, that water is running off, not as fast as the driveway, but not a whole lot slower. It's right behind it. So these are all approximations and things we have to deal with. We were trying to bring you something that would proportion it, make it a little bit so that the person in the 6,000 square foot house would pay more than the person in the 2,000 square foot house, given that on the average, those two structures, when they're averaged together, one generates more runoff than the other.
Okay, John.
I couldn't heard a more compelling case for a tax over a fee than the one just made, but that aside, is as you create credit systems, which San Diego did for water conservation, they were so effective, in the end, they still had to collect $45 million. So the credit system, while it worked, then they had to raise the fee because of their success. Just like Virginia Natural Gas gets their rate increased so they can give you an incentive to make your house more secure because they're selling less gas. So they raised your rate to give you incentive and advertise on radio, which is what they did. So you're paying for it. So so when you start looking at these things and then you say it's the 100-year storm, that's the big capital expenses, then there definitely is no relationship between big capital expenses of $300 million, because it serves the whole city, keeps the road clean, rescue. It just makes and you don't have the overhead. No one's having to measure anything. You don't have to have runtime on a computer. You don't have to. When you look at simplicity, it's like police and it's like fire. We're protecting people's homes from water, we're protecting them from crime, we're protecting them from fire. I'd love to see, when you answer her question, how much administrative costs go away and how many FTEs are freed up if we don't have the overhead of a fee structure for basically what is a common purpose public function.
Okay, anybody else?
I'm happy to raise the real estate tax to pay for it.
Yeah, Guy.
On that point, what is the history, John? You sort of implied to it that we may have adopted this, notwithstanding that it mimics the real estate tax because of size for, what was the reason?
In 1993, when the EPA issued all this regulations and the consent decree, it was all about water quality. No one ever talked about flooding or flood mitigation or drainage prevention or improvement as a consequence of the fee, but we blamed the federal government that you had to have a fee to take care of water quality. Federal government never said how you had to do it, but that was our rationale. At the time, we were making sure, because there was an industry here to create a fee for everything. If you go back and look at the budget strategies, it's where can you create a fee? That was, we were on the fee train. And you can issue revenue bonds with a fee, and revenue bonds don't count against your general obligation debt limit. It had more to do with the debt structure that we wanted to do, because we wanted to borrow money for other stuff. And the fee allowed, you can watch the tapes, and, because I spoke about it then. And so what drove us there? Then we moved the boardwalk, which was built with federal grant and city money, was being maintained out of general revenues, and it was moved into the fee structure. And so was mosquito control, and we took the 2 cents tax and put it somewhere else. Well, now we've moved mosquito back. So the fee structure just became a mechanism for taking on what previously had been, in terms of storm, paid for out of the general fund. And so in reality, it's a tax. And I think we just ought to acknowledge, as we're looking at the big bill that we have going forward, which is billions of dollars, this fee is not going to be an equitable way to meet our flood issues. It's just not. Now, in all fairness, and I've mentioned this, there are people who are tax exempt because we've made them tax exempt. So that revenue will have to be captured, and those people won't be paying the fee. But, you know, there's some mechanisms you could look at there. But if you're asking the origin of that, we made a choice to not use the general fund and instead use a fee. But the federal government did not require us to impose a fee.
Barbara?
Well, we did the same thing when we took solid waste from solid waste, which had been paid for with the taxes, and made a fee with that. And that also is inequitable when you have somebody that puts out 4 big overflowing black cans every week, and then you've got this person who lives alone and maybe puts a half a can out every other week. So it's not equitable either. But we did that, I think it was your recommendation about 4 years ago.
I'd like to
go to
respond
that
that if
fee.
I could.
I know, we don't have time to do all of that. But it's whether you go to a fee or whether you go to a tax. It's either or, it's how you pay for it, and it's never equitable. I don't think any of them are. But that's the same thing, it's the same thing in going to the solid waste fee rather than taxes.
I do want to say one thing about that. Before I got here, the city council had already started charging for the trash fee and not lowering the real estate tax. When Senator Bill DeStefano was still here on the dais, we had the compromise. I'm sure Louis and some of you remember, we had the last bit where we actually reduced this real estate tax 2%.
2 cents.
2 cents, I think I said 2 cents, I always said 2 cents.
2%.
Oh, yeah, it was 2 cents, thank you, Rosemary. And we then went to complete fee, but already 8 cents of real estate tax had already been moved. They're talking about the last 4 cents. But I do agree with you, we can make the variable cost, because I think the cost to go in every house is fixed, we've looked at that before, but the tipping fee is a variable part. If we can find a way to cost effectively measure the cans, and that ought to be the challenge, I'm all in favor of charging people for the amount of stuff that they pay, because that's the weight and that's what we pay. But the cost of going to every house is a fixed cost that you don't change just because you only put 1 can, I still gotta drive by your house. But you are correct, we need to charge by weight, and I'm not opposed to that at all.
And we made an enterprise fund so that it has to pay for itself.
Correct, and there is truly, the service you get, unlike this, is truly measurable, and it is at your house. But your point about there is inequities, I agree with you, that's true.
Okay. Anybody else?
Can I just ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
About slide 6. We have, our cost is, I realize these are different square footage per, I'm looking at slide 6.
Correct.
Yeah, you got different square footages per ERU, and they're not converted into per foot. But why, we're at $14.98, and I thought, I can't remember whether it was you or Mark, but one of you, or maybe you're both Marks, said we're kind of like everybody else. But aren't we much higher than most people other than Alexandria?
Well, Alexandria is about the same, but you're right, you're higher than the others that are shown here that have a tiered structure.
In those jurisdictions, stormwater is simply a matter of getting it a very short distance to a stormwater floodplain that is practically infinite relative to the development.
So-
In our case, it's exactly
So what's the
opposite.
deal in Norfolk, for example, or somewhere else that's got flooding issues like we do? What do they charge?
Norfolk,
We only included ones that were tiered.
Yeah, we were only looking at the ones that
I
were tiered,
understand, I'm
right?
just trying to figure, what is
Norfolk's
is there any comparable, do they have a stormwater fee?
sure, we're at
46 cents?
46 cents per day, and they're currently at 38 cents per day. Now, what you have to do, I mean,
And they're much more compact.
yes,
area,
but you
yeah.
have to look at their stormwater management program. They could be doing less than we are. They could be doing a lot less. And that's what you really have to look at when you
Right, I
try and
understand.
compare municipalities, especially throughout the Commonwealth.
I was just kind of trying to get a feel for what people are paying, where it is pulled out.
Newport News is paying or charging $11.60 a month.
Are there any cities that are still just paying for the tax? Any significant cities in Virginia? Almost all of them have stormwater fees.
Not that I know of.
We'll get a list of that.
Yeah, we can get
You're gonna find that there's some jurisdictions that have very limited problems and very limited costs.
Yeah.
It probably is embedded in their taxes. We'll get you a list.
That's all right, I'm just trying to get a little more knowledge base.
There's none
Anybody
less
else?
coastal like we are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, we are, city council comments, anyone?
I just have one. Have we decided when's gonna be our next discussion about overall budgetary guidance? So we said we were gonna have another meeting. We've had the 5-year forecast. I'm just curious, when is that discussion going to take place?
Well, we can maybe schedule it as part of, a council discussion.
And can we, and I'm not saying, I don't wanna be the one, cause I have my own strong views, that's a surprise to everyone. But it would be good if we could, if you or someone or the group, we could frame some questions that maybe the manager needs to tell us the questions that he thinks that we need to answer. If one of our options is we don't wanna raise taxes and fees in this next budget, what are the kind of questions we have to answer? I just think that's how we have responsible outcomes from the discussion, if we, like we did with short-term rentals, I remember we walked some questions, we came around and we resolved each of them in pieces, and ultimately we got to some end state. But I don't know how you wanna structure it, I'll be responsive, but I just think without a structure, we won't get to a decision, and I just wanna make sure we have some kind of outcome we're shooting for.
Well, I think given, just what we discussed at the 5-year forecast with the numerous challenges that we have, school modernization, $3 billion, our initial stormwater fee, obligation, $3.75 billion. Maybe we should have a strategy session to sit down and, figure out how we're gonna do this. I think a lot of the answer is gonna come that to make sure we really have a enhanced economic development strategy where we're bringing in new business, not displacement business, in terms of just creating those new revenues and everything. And I think in a lot of ways, we have made some of those gains with Taylor and, Ron, and, just trying to get those new businesses in here with broadband and everything coming. But maybe a discussion on, figuring out how we're gonna deal with these problems would in fact be in order. And I think we can schedule a council, time to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sir?
So we just, on the one issue of this, we took an hour.
Right.
So when we talk, and I'll look at the 3-month list, and we can schedule do an hour perhaps for discussion of the budget, of broad budget guidelines.
Probably more than one.
Yeah,
day.
probably, I'll tell you what, why don't we do an hour and a half, and then if we have to follow through with additional, would that be acceptable to folks?
That's good. I don't think an hour would be. It's up to you.
Yeah,
It's up to you.
we'll schedule an hour and a half, and then we
When
can
you're just
maybe
kind of
make an
throwing
outcome.
things in the air, you
And-
don't really know what to say.
We're okay with starting earlier?
Not at 12.
No, not at 12:30 though.
Not at 12:30. Is there a cutoff limit here? Is there?
Like 2 o'clock is good.
Sort of a curfew time?
Yeah.
Stay late. if we're asking.
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah, but, maybe we can do it on a, day where we have a workshop schedule, so if we do, if we do have to go over a tad,
Okay.
that we would do that. Guy?
I just, we're still in the comments, right?
Yes.
I just was looking at some of the applications on the short-term rentals for the conditional use permits that are coming up and noticing that in the Old Beach District, there are some multiple applications for properties within the same block or blocks back to back. And I wasn't around when the SDRs were done, but I tell you, I'm told that the Sandbridge was the driving force of dealing with Sandbridge, but these blocks in the Old Beach District where people have got, they've been building houses in there for the purpose of turning them into short-term rentals. And the threat to the character of the neighborhood from taking whole blocks or big hunks of whole blocks and turning them into short-term rental properties is troubling. And I don't have anything to say other than say when we get to those, I think we all need to sort of focus on, because I think a lot of time and effort and money has been spent trying to preserve those neighborhoods, and now.
You have no idea.
I have no idea. You're right, I'll certainly concede that.
Can I build on that? What I've heard from a few
Anyway.
people down there is that people think that people are getting parking, with those big discussions, where you're gonna park your cars on your property on the street, and that people are getting the resort area residential parking permits for short-term
Well,
rental occupancy, and I don't think that was our intent. I don't know if that's true.
That's
just-
one
just
of
something I'm
the,
hearing.
that is certainly one of the issues. One is parking,
Back before a
but the
year.
other is just the saturation level. And I'd say, well, what do you do? Do you say, we can't have more than one in a block, and if so, who gets it?
I tell you, you can't go there.
Can't do that.
But
We've been down that trail.
You're the district council person.
Stop smiling.
It's a great town hall.
Good point, Scott. Anybody else?
oh yeah, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the ones that have to come to us. We're gonna have to make some decisions here very soon, and I just kind of giving everybody a heads up that these are the issues I think
No,
we're
I
gonna
think
hear.
Mark
about
was
this
gonna tell
pile
you,
of
you can't.
issues
every
if you
bit.
want to borrow it.
Yeah.
You might want to have a good conversation with Mark about some of that.
Okay, Mr. Wood.
Okay, under ordinances and resolutions, we have speakers on 3 and 4.
I'm voting no on one, but it can stay on consent, but I will make a comment.
So on 4, and I talked to Jessica about this, about putting a line in to make sure that the school part of that money is not to be affected by the 25%. Would you?
I don't
Is that
have
okay?
I don't have a problem with pointing it out. I don't know how, I'm not opposed to what you're asking. I would lean on somebody who knows how to craft that language better than
We could
I do.
just,
I mean, it does say it is only for
It's,
general
it's,
fund.
it's being heard. It's being heard, so.
So,
Which one's being heard against?
Which item?
3
the
and
one
4.
I propose.
Okay, and on 2, I just have a comment, because it just struck me as odd that a pawnbroker be a natural person. I don't know, that struck anybody as odd, but that was
I
just
had a question
a
about that,
weird
too.
term. I
Need a
just,
definition.
yeah, I just didn't like it.
I think it means not
oh, you're delaying it.
Corporation is
Opposed to
a
a
person.
corporate.
I know, but it's
Corporation's a
just,
person.
I'm just telling you, it just reads bad.
What would you call them? A human?
Well, that certainly would be better.
Is that what it's trying to
It's a pretty
illustrate, though?
pretty
Trying to say it's not a
normal.
corporate.
Between a live
Individual.
human being and
Oh,
a
that's
corporate
fine.
entity.
I had the same, I was like, what?
And I think that's probably the language in the
like what's
underlying
going on.
legislation.
Well, yeah, we don't hear that, so you'll,
I
Just the
thought
way
they were
we,
talking like a
it's just the way
natural
lawyers.
bystander.
or whatever.
No, this
no.
has nothing
I
to
was like,
do with
what?
immigration or citizenship.
No, it's an Aretha
Okay.
Franklin.
Okay,
Oh,
so,
Okay, Mr. Wood.
all right, so other than, John's voting no on 1, everybody's okay with the natural person line?
I'm voting no on 1 as well,
Okay, Jessica, no.
but it can stay on consent.
All right, anybody else on any of these? Okay, under planning, G's Group LLC, and that's Princess Anne, they want to defer to December 3rd, you okay with that?
I believe.
All right, well, unfortunately, on J2, we have a speaker, so we have to hear that one. I do have a question for staff, though. It says applicant request deferral, staff denial, planning commission approval, but when I read it, it looks like staff is recommending approval.
Applicant request.
Are they denying the deferral or denying the
No,
application?
no, it's just,
It's denial.
Mr. Wood, the staff came with a recommendation to the planning commission. The planning commission made a change in one of the conditions, and staff and the administration is in alignment with the condition change that the planning commission created.
okay, well, we have a speaker on this. It's the same speaker on a couple of other things, so but because it's planning, we have to hear it. We can't put it at the beginning. That's correct, Mark? So we'll have that, and then, Mr. Tower, if it's okay deferring it, otherwise you'll make a motion, okay. All right, that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that's it. I think at this point, we'll just recess until we go to the formal session. Yes.
Yes, since we have 30 minutes, can we go into closed session to talk about timetable for city manager search?
You could make it, there could be a new motion to go into closed.
Is that for a contract term or about discussion?
No, we can't talk about.
Can't talk about timeline in the thing, you just told me couldn't talk about timeline in closed session. That's what I thought you told us.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I mean, you can talk about it right now in open session.
Right, that's what
Talk about it now.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I prefer if we talked about it in open, because
well, I didn't know if we had to go in closed session or not.
Okay.
Well, I'd like for us to discuss or just come up with a schedule on the city manager's search, when we're gonna start the week, since everyone is here now, when we can tell the company, basically when we will start our town halls, our meetings, basically just get a tentative schedule so that we're all on the same page.
So the schedule, we don't like?
I think it'd be better to
Well,
wait till
I didn't know if
after
everyone
Christmas.
agreed to it or not, I just
The
don't
what?
wanna
To
have a
wait till after
process.
I agree
the
with you.
holidays.
Yeah, I don't know if we just wanna have a process where we all.
Unless there's a reason.
I doubt we'll have very good turnout in December to
I
any of
think
this
it's better
stuff.
for the public because they're really busy getting ready for the holidays.
So I propose we would start it in the new year,
Yeah.
maybe January the 8th or the 10th or something like that. After the new year.
I think
Okay,
that's a good-
discussion?
I think that's a good call.
I
Because
agree.
people are gonna be busy.
Mark? Okay.
January is a pretty crummy month too sometimes with the weather. But if we put it off this long, is this still a good bid for these people? Or were they bidding based on, I mean, how long is their offer good? I mean, and how long are we going to?
Well, I think we would go ahead and award the contract and just give them the schedule, and if they indicate they have a problem with that, we'd come back to you.
It was an indicative schedule they gave you, so presumably, as long as it meets their travel needs or your desires, that they would work with you based on that sort of form schedule whenever it works out for both parties.
I think what Barbara might be making reference to, and I don't wanna speak for her, is that they, like everybody else, has a workload plan and people to pay. They may not have a work schedule, and we'll find that out, that can accommodate the change we made. I think that's what she was after.
Yeah.
Well, I would think that this will give us the best opportunity for the public to be involved with, for
I
us to
agree
take
with you
our
on that.
time, and everyone to be, after the holidays, to really focus on this important topic of choosing the city manager.
I guess, Aaron, my only concern is that this is gonna result in another month delay in the selection process. And I remember a number of years ago, if I could just bring this up, when we were, discussing about the initial arena deal with the Sacramento Kings and everything, and we actually had a public hearing the week before Christmas, and that was the only day we could have it. And we had like 350 people show up. But the point is, my concern is that we demonstrate to the public that, we're getting this done, and they have to get the baseline of stuff that they need just to go forward to start, recruiting. So, but once again, that's just my focus group of one. Jim?
I agree with you, because I think starting December 2nd to December 6th is not exactly in the holidays. That's the big, I mean, if we're gonna write off the entire month of December as saying nobody's gonna do anything the entire month of December, I don't think that's reasonable. And, this has been going on a long time. You know, the public, you know, frankly, the last time we didn't have we did multiple outreach sessions, and we did not have that many people that showed up at these various meetings. I mean, we can have them again, but I don't think there's gonna be a whole lot of people. It's not like the Sacramento Kings type thing where everybody's interested in that. I mean, you know, and I think also the fact that we have the opportunity now that we didn't necessarily have then for a lot of online input and things like that, especially if we end up doing that, what's that survey tool? I can't remember the name of it now. Public input. So maybe you can do that, but I think I'd hate to waste another month on this because, you know, if you do this from the, based on this, December 2nd to December 6th, then they immediately start advertising. And, you know, look, the people who are in the market for this job, it's gonna be slow for them where they are, so they're gonna have time to put their applications together and things like that, I think, but, you know, I just hate to lose another month, because that puts us well into March then, and Mr. Leahy is, probably wanting to,
Well, you should not make any, you should not rush on my account. This is an important decision. I would certainly not walk out because you took 4 months versus 3 months, or 5 months versus 3 months. So my advice would be, don't rush this, and don't pinch pennies on it either, because it's the most important decision you will make as a council, I think.
Yeah, Guy?
I'll second. I think putting it off for a month sends the wrong message to the public. I think they are waiting to hear from us. I think there is anticipation. I've had a number of people ask me, how come you haven't done anything about this yet? Haven't you been doing this for months? And in addition to that, personally, this fits my schedule a lot better, frankly, than doing it in early January, but that's just a very personal observation.
And the other thing is, we're gonna be getting into, probably right in January, getting into, you know, starting to get into budget cycle and, you know, things of that nature. And Aaron, I do agree with you that we have to optimize public input. You know, especially constituency groups that, you know, have to be involved. But I think if we do it in early December, before people start getting really engaged into, you know, the holidays, and, you know, because once again, if we, you know, they're gonna need this data to move forward and put the word out, and, you know, this is what we're looking for, and things of that nature. And then even by then, you know, we may be looking, what, potentially March, you know, but by the time we get into decision process, you know, so, you know, that's my thoughts.
I mean, I'm sorry. You go.
Another round of public involvement that's, I guess, about ready to start is on our Dewberry report, or our cities thing. I mean, aren't we supposed to be getting the draft of that in December?
it's on
And
my
that's supposed
desk
to go
right
out
now.
to the public in December and January? And if we're gonna be getting the public out to comment on that, which is extremely important, because I guess our final deadline on that has to be February, is that still?
I'll get you the exact date. We were granted more time because of the May 31 event.
Right, I mean, we were supposed to finish in November.
And we were
But
granted
the
more
NOAA
time.
grant is, I mean, so we're getting ready to have to go out to the public on that very, very, very important thing, to get their comments on the final, and, you know, we can only expect them to come out, so,
So if we do this in
Yeah.
December, will
Okay.
Dewberry be in January?
well, I don't know, but we should be getting it. I was kinda asking when we're gonna get that, because I thought we had told people it was gonna be December.
Say the first draft sitting on my desk, I've been reading through it, and
Okay.
so we will have it out for public view in December.
So
Well,
that's gonna be
okay,
going out
Aaron.
now.
Well, I agree. Then again, I think if we can agree on the schedule, then I'm all for it. I just want to make sure we can devote the time we need to make sure the public get out and the word gets out, so that we are getting the feedback and giving the public enough time to be involved in this process. But if this is what we are agreeing to, like, I don't have a problem with it at all. I just would like to ask for to make a decision now,
Yeah,
It's a worthy discussion.
right? And let's get it out there. Let's go.
right. And then the other thing is too, we got a couple weeks later to really get the word out. You know, I think we'll make a decision, decision point tonight. And then we can get things solidified, and that would give a couple weeks for, you know, things to get our word out that this is gonna be happening. Are we okay with that, folks? Aaron, thanks for bringing this up. Okay? All right, at this point, let's take a recess until 6 o'clock.